Hello and welcome back to the RedMars Podcast. I'm your host, Astro Jake, and today we're diving into what I believe many of you are probably interested in or at least curious about, and that is how to land a job with a space company, especially if you're a software engineer or aspiring to be one. I say especially this because I myself started my career in the aerospace industry, or the space industry, as a software engineer, so that is what I am most familiar with. I've also interviewed many other software engineers for other roles within the company that I work for and other software-based companies, and so we'll talk a bit about that. So if you've ever dreamt of writing code that controls satellites, powers mission-critical software, or even lands a spacecraft on another planet, then this episode is for you. We'll talk about the skills you need and what companies are looking for, and how to ace that interview process. So let's jump right in. Let's start with the space software landscape. So first, let's talk about what kind of software roles exist in the space industry. It's not just a one type of job. There are multiple roles that contribute to different aspects for space missions. So flight software engineers are one of these roles. These engineers write the code that runs directly on satellites, rovers, and or spacecraft. The software must be ultra reliable, highly efficient, and able to operate in extreme environments. Some key things to note here, or some standards, that is DO 178C. This is highly required for any type of flight software, so definitely encourage if you are unfamiliar with going and taking a look at this, as well as what it takes to qualify software for a flight vehicle. There are also FAA requirements that I would also encourage you to look at. Next, we have ground systems engineers. They develop the software used on Earth to control space assets, monitor telemetry, and send commands to satellites. Ground systems engineers are critical to the space mission, so just because you're not writing absolute flight software, don't by any means think that the role is any less needed. So ground systems engineers are really the backbone to any space mission, as this is where the telemetry and control really comes from. So definitely a very interesting role and highly valuable and rewarding. Next up, let's look at embedded systems engineers. These roles involve working with low-level hardware, ensuring processors and microcontrollers can handle mission-critical tasks. This is a really interesting role, and I have not directly been an embedded systems engineer, but I have worked on some of these embedded systems, both as a hobbyist and in my professional career, that require real-time operating systems, also microcontrollers. And for those that are very keen on problem solving or mathematical problems and algorithms and really want to write the most, efficient type of software, then embedded systems is probably the one for you. Next up, we have data scientists and AI engineers. These experts analyze large data sets from space missions and develop AI models for applications like object recognition and satellite imagery. Now, depending on which space companies you are looking for, it might be hard to find roles in this area. This technology of data science and AI is still relatively new in terms of space, and finding these roles are, few and far between. But if you do find one and it fits your background, or you are early on in your education, it would be key to kind of guide yourself or talk to a mentor or somebody like that can help guide you for which specific classes or topics to learn about in order to best set you up. Obviously, in data science, any type of big data type of course, as well as AI-related computer science courses, are definitely going to get you in the right direction. All right, then we have a DevOps and CI/CD engineer. So automation is key in the modern space industry. These engineers ensure seamless software development, testing, and reliability for mission-critical applications. Now, from my experience, I have found there are typically no specific DevOps and CI/CD engineers. That's continuous integration and continuous development. So that is everything from what we call a pipeline, which is an automated process for checking, running regression tests, building your code, and then sending that down to some storage or some artifact location where those builds will then live. And then that's the code that gets run on your systems. So typically this role is adopted across all the other roles previously mentioned. So flight software engineers, ground systems engineers, embedded systems engineers, data scientists, AI engineers, they're all going to have some sort of pipeline that they will typically be responsible for maintaining. There is a possibility that there is somebody on that team that specializes in this DevOps CI/CD background, but they typically fall into these roles after getting the job, or they are somebody who has been on the team for quite some time. So one thing I think that is valuable that we don't really come across in the aerospace industry are individuals that have a strong DevOps or CI/CD background. So those that do have that definitely stand out in the interview process, at least in my opinion. All right, so of course, the one that we haven't talked about just yet, but we spoke about in the previous podcast, that is cybersecurity. So cybersecurity is becoming increasingly important as space assets become prime targets for cyber threats, something we've discussed previously. So cybersecurity roles at space companies is increasingly growing, and you will start to see more and more of these roles pop up. Now, since it is fairly new, the teams are typically pretty small and just get used across all the other teams. So roles in the cyber world in space companies, I find, are typically few and far between, but definitely keep an eye out, and if that's your specialty, you're definitely not limited to cybersecurity. So to give an example, my undergrad is computer and internet security specialization from computer science, which is more or less cybersecurity. And with that background, I still have all the key aspects needed, and if not some other upsides to it that I guess a straight software engineer stream of computer science may not have. So not saying any better or any worse, but you just have some unique skill sets that come along with it, and a lot of that comes with problem solving and how you look at different problems. So the space industry is an interesting, I guess, area, as you'll find most people that come into the space industry may come from defense industries and that, but you'll also find that in the more modern private industry companies like SpaceX, Blue Origin, and such, that they actually hire people from very diverse backgrounds. So just because you may have started out in fintech or some other straight software company or even medical background, your programming skills and those unique skill sets you have acquired from your other years of experience in those fields is actually more applicable to the space industry than you may think in many different ways. So, for example, I worked for JP Morgan for many years before making the switch. There was another job that I worked in between around experimentation, but before coming to the aerospace and space industry, I was kind of worried. I was like, my background was more so in that fintech world, and I have no space experience. Now, I had done my master's in space systems, but with that outside of it, my actual professional experience was all in fintech. So how was somebody with that background able to get a job, or why would I even apply to a space company? What could I do to best prepare? Well, it turns out that a lot of the, I guess, underlying technologies and that I used for my fintech job as a software engineer is highly applicable to the space industry in terms of real-time operations and sub-second calculations and all that. Well, that's very applicable to software and flight software and simulation software for the space industry, as you have a lot of the same constraints, just a different ecosystem. So don't think that because of your past employment or skill sets or professions that you have done that you are not actually best fit for a role. So definitely don't let that discourage you. All right, so let's look at the skills you need now that we're on that topic. So what does it take to land one of these roles? And here are the skills companies like SpaceX, NASA, Blue Origin, and other space companies kind of look for. So again, we're focusing on the software side of things, but I'll make little comments here and there based on other roles that I've interviewed individuals for different space companies. So we'll get into that. So the first programming language, and I'm sure many people would guess this, but that is C and C++. This is the king of embedded and flight software. Python is also widely used for scripting, automation, and data analysis, and you might also encounter maybe Rust. I have not in my career, but I do know other people that do use Rust, and that's more so for reliability and performance. Now, the main ones you're going to see C++, Python, and then being familiar with Unix or Linux-based systems and doing bash scripting is also highly valuable in this field, as you'll find that a lot of these systems, real-time systems, a lot of them are Linux-based and will require you to be familiar with the command line. All right, so moving on to the next. So embedded systems and real-time operating systems, also known as RTOS. That's Romeo Tango Oscar Sierra. Spacecraft software often runs on real-time systems where precision and reliability are critical. So real-time is a difficult word based on my more recent discussions with other individuals that are not in the embedded or software based roles and trying to explain what real-time actually means. And really, it's the ability to run as per a system clock in a way that you have to handle memory and access to memory and whatnot in a very specific way to ensure that you do not run into conflicts. You are typically very constrained on resources and that on these types of systems, and you have to be very critical on resource usage, memory management, and garbage cleanup, especially because you are using a language such as C and C++, which it's not done for you. So using tools like semaphores or mutex locks are definitely going to be key in working on these systems. And then scheduling and whatnot when you are building out your, applications or programs that will be running on these real-time operating systems. Understanding how the scheduler works and everything like that is also very key. I'm not going to go into how to actually program or work on these real-time systems, but if this is an area that you are interested in, you can definitely play around with these at home on things like Raspberry Pis or STM32s and stuff like that for very low cost and get some experience before putting that application into one of these space companies. All right, next up we have networking and protocols. So some people focus on the networking side of the world or absolutely love that, and they are definitely the backbone to all of these systems coming together, from flight software to ground systems to whatever part of the infrastructure of a space environment that you can think of. Networking is there. So understanding communication protocols, particularly for spacecraft telemetry and command systems, this is major. So it is not required for a lot of the software engineering roles, especially for, ground systems, embedded systems, flight software engineers. Most of these individuals are not well versed, I would say, in networking and network protocols. However, having that background and understanding to be able to troubleshoot to a certain extent is highly valuable. There are typically networking or some sort of network engineers that take care of the setup of these environments, but they are typically few and far between on these roles or in these companies, and getting their time can be very difficult. And so it definitely helps to have that background so you can do some initial troubleshooting or at least understand what to ask for so you can make the best use of those individuals' times. Now, if you are one of those individuals looking for a networking role, you will be an absolute asset to any space company you could apply for, as these resources, as I mentioned, are hard to come by. So if you have a niche for that area and you find a networking role and you want to get into the space industry, I highly encourage you to apply for those requisitions, because you will be highly desired. All right, so next up, as we kind of talked about, just kind of going in order here, CI/CD and DevOps. So as I mentioned, continuous integration and development pipelines ensure software is tested and deployed reliably, and this is huge in this industry. Automation runs the testing and certification process for a lot of these companies, which allows them to really run through Monte Carlo testing. Again, if you don't know Monte Carlo, highly recommend looking up all these terms that I mentioned. This is, if you're not familiar, you hear something I say and you're like, oh, I'm not sure what that is. Rather than me explaining each individual thing, we could talk for days on that. I would say take notes of these different terminologies and look them up and really understand them, so that when you go to a coding interview or any real interview for a space company, you can blow it out of the water and be like, I know everything you were talking about. I think one of the biggest things I learned going from, say, fintech to a space industry company was being able to speak the lingo is huge. You'll hear all kinds of terms that they throw around in the space industry that they just assume, hey, you're applying to a space role, you would know this. And the first time I heard a lot of these things, I was like, I have absolutely no idea what you're talking about. Now, this was before I had started my master's. But once I got into my master's and I was able to really focus on the space industry and learn what these terms mean and what the lingo is that's spoken in this industry, it definitely helped. And ask questions. That's one thing I think I want to make very clear is if you make it your way into an interview, do not be afraid to ask questions. If you don't understand, tell them, hey, I don't understand what this is. I haven't heard this term before, especially coming from the industry that I'm coming from, but I'm a quick learner. Please, can you explain to me what this is? And so I can take some notes. And you'll find that goes a lot farther than pretending to know what they are talking about or assuming you know what they're talking about. If there's any doubt in your mind, definitely ask the questions. I asked tons of questions in my interview, and it led to some really great conversations and now great relationships with those people in the company that I work for. So definitely just want to mention that. All right, another very key aspect of any role that you apply to into a space company, that is going to be version control, and specifically Git. And I will mention SVN as much as I really don't want to, but SVN is a very old version control tool that is still used today across many companies, and doesn't seem to matter where I go, everybody still has remnants of it around. So just wanted to say that's one you got to look at as well. But we'll specifically mention Git. Git is more or less a standard in practice pretty much everywhere in industry today, but space companies take it extremely seriously because every line of code matters, especially when we're talking about certification and repeatability in different tests. You must have your version control locked down and properly documented, and knowing how to leave a good commit message in a version control tool is absolutely key. I always hate coming by notes and commit messages when I'm looking through the version history of some code, trying to understand a change that was made, and it just says updated the code, or made a change, or fixed a bug, or fixed the bug, or something like that. And then you have to kind of go and debug what the bug might have been, try and recreate it. I don't know, but you're trying to figure out what changes were made and whatnot, and it can be quite hard, especially as some of the changes get larger. So referring to something like a Jira ticket, Jira is another part of that CI/CD and DevOps environment. It is a ticketing system that allows you to track progress on different tasks and falls under more of an agile tool. Agile is another methodology as part of DevOps and helps with quick turnaround times on development of different tasks. And it can actually be used not just for software engineers, but for really any part of development, whether it's, documentation, code, modeling of different items or physics and whatnot. It's very key. So won't kind of beat this one to death here, but just wanted to mention that having version control combined with CI/CD development and whatnot, and those pipelines, and really understanding all of this, it is huge and goes a long way, and probably one of the most, I would say, missed skill that I have found when software engineers coming from, say, defense companies and whatnot come to a lot of these other space companies, is they are missing that skill set. Usually they have other teams that run all this for them, but when you get to some of these other companies like SpaceX, Blue Origin, and whatnot, we tend to wear a lot more hats at these companies, and being able to fill those roles is definitely invaluable. Now, obviously, all these can be taught on the job, but having that skill set from the get-go is just one less thing that needs to be taught and allows you to kind of get up to speed a lot quicker. Typically, I have found that the time it takes to become a contributing member, depending on the level you are applying for, ranges anywhere from 3 to 6 months before you're fully autonomous in your role. All right, let's continue on here. So after version control, we have mathematics and physics. So a basic knowledge of orbital mechanics, sensor fusion, and control systems can definitely set you apart. So just because you're not applying for a GNC role, which is guidance, navigation, and control, it definitely helps to have an understanding of just basics of those systems and how they work and the mathematics and physics behind them. And it'll help you better understand how to write good critical flight software, ground systems, and whatnot. Or it always helps to know what you're developing for. When I'm working on a piece of code that is for maybe handling, I'm just going to pick something out of the blue, like thrust vector control or gimbaling of a rocket engine. It's really cool to really have the background knowledge of understanding what goes into the design of one of those systems, rather than just the code itself, but understanding, like one of these engines produces X amount of thrust or pounds of force, or, the throat to nozzle ratio is calculated for this reason because it is a engine developed for at sea level over something it developed for in a vacuum, or any of these aspects. It definitely helps. And just basics of these. Now, you obviously don't have to be an expert, and you're not expected to be an expert, especially if you're applying to one of these software-based roles, but really having that background is going to set you apart, because you can have more informed decision-making and conversations with those individuals when you're trying to build out code to support their systems. So I won't go too much more into that one, but definitely want to call that out, because most individuals that are working in the software industry or come from computer science do not have that background either. Again, does not mean you're not going to get the role, but these are little things that set you apart and allow you to have those conversations, to have a more personable interview with the company that you're applying with. So if you're looking to really break in and build your skills, then taking note of all these areas definitely essential, and having a bit of knowledge of all of these will help you better knock that interview out of the park. All right, let's talk a bit about the hiring process, and again, how can you stand out? So now let's say you have the skills, but how do you actually land the job? So here's what the hiring process looks like and how you can prepare best. So let's first look at the application and resume. So highlight projects related to either embedded systems, space software, high reliability applications. So notice the last one there, high reliability applications. This does not need to be anything related to space. In my experience before coming to a space company, as I mentioned, I was working in fintech. I worked on the authorization platform, which, if code is incorrect or slow or whatnot, a lot of money can go missing really fast. So it was a high reliability application. And actually during COVID, we were considered essential personnel because money had to keep moving. So fun fact, interesting topic, but yes, so these are the things you kind of want to focus, or anything you think might pertain to the role you are applying to. You're obviously not limited to just these topics. So if you've contributed to open source projects related to aerospace or robotics, that is also a huge plus. Yes, your hobbies and side projects also play a key role in setting you apart from other applicants. If you show that you have an interest in space, even though you haven't worked in that industry, but you contribute to open source projects, or you build little robotics on the side, all of this, or you're a hobbyist rocket scientist or something on the side where you build little model rockets, all of these things help build you as an applicant for the role. But you don't want to go overboard and call out everything. So you really want to keep your resume clean, concise, and right to the point. So technical space companies, they love straight to the point, skill-focused resumes. And I try to tell a lot of people this when they, if they show me their resume or something like that, shorten it, keep it small, keep it sweet, keep it to the point. They are looking for keywords and skill sets, and that is all. Now, stories about, hey, I've won these awards, I've, have this experience working on these systems and all that, save that for the technical screening or your panel interview or whatever the process looks like at the company you are applying to. You will typically have a recruiter reach out to you if your initial set of skills meets what that hiring manager is looking for. So if you're applying to a software engineering role and the requirements are 3 years of C++, you need to have somewhat of a physics background, interest in the company, CI/CD pipeline background, exposure to Git and agile methodologies, and you hit all those on your resume, typically you'll get an initial phone call or something like that, as long as the role has not already been filled. Now, if you have, a bit more above and beyond, say their minimum requirements is a bachelor's and you have a master's, yeah, you'll probably have it. Now, what I have noticed is a lot of companies are not actually huge fans of PhDs, especially for these roles at the levels of 1, 2, 3, and 4. Reason being is PhD is typically very theoretical based and not as hands-on, especially if you've never worked in industry and you've just gone straight through the PhD. Now, that does not mean that you will not get the role or get the interview, but you definitely want to emphasize in your resume not just your research, but the hands-on experience that you do have to show the company that you have that experience as well, and that'll definitely help your application process. But back to the resume, clean, concise, to the point form of your skills and your roles and responsibilities, and you should be good to go. And then again, all those kind of stories and summaries of what you worked on that are a bit longer, that you really, really want to share and you feel like I have to put that in my resume, as much as you want to put it in there, definitely take that out and fill them in the actual like text screen, and that when the recruiter calls, let them know. When you hear from the hiring manager, say, hey, if I can tell a bit about myself, typically they'll want to ask you to like give them your elevator pitch, which is like your 30 seconds of, you know, who you are, not what your skills are and that, but like who are you as a person. And that's when you can throw these stories and that in there. All right, so moving on from the resume, we have technical interviews. So this is after you've had your technical screening typically. So expect heavy C++ questions if you're applying for flight software roles. Embedded system candidates might be asked about memory management, real-time constraints, debugging firmware, and other companies may have actual live coding tests on like leak code style problems, while others prefer deep discussions and that on your past projects. Prepare for whiteboarding sessions on algorithms, data structures, and some physics-related problems. I've experienced all of these, not all with aerospace, but most of the aerospace-related interviews that I have done have been, again, heavy on the C and C++ and really understanding the bones of C++, I guess you could say. So there's a big difference between somebody who says, I know how to program in C++, and then someone who says, I know C++. And what I mean by that is somebody who knows how to write C++ might be able to write a snippet of code that solves a problem that you have asked them to solve, or the algorithm. But if you ask them how that actually functions or how it works underlying, like what is a null pointer, what is a shared pointer, how do these things work, what is a copy constructor, what actually happens behind the scenes, when you ask these questions, if you're not able to answer those questions, you probably are not prepared enough for that interview, especially for a software engineering role. I ask a lot of these questions when I interview to really get an understanding of where this individual is at in their experience. And I've had individuals where I ask, how long have you been writing C++ for? And I might get, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 years. I'm like, very cool, awesome. Like, that's great to hear. Can you tell me a bit about your experience and what kind of code you write? Because I like to understand, what areas they've applied their coding skills to. Is it a gaming environment? Have they been focused more on resource constraint types of coding and whatnot? And then from there, that can lead me to my questions that maybe lead more around memory management, real-time constraints, or maybe I really want to harp down on their object-oriented programming abilities. And again, this is going to depend on the role itself, but these are all things that you should be prepared to answer to the most detail. So there are many tutorials on YouTube that really dive into these different aspects of different versions of C++. Now, C++, I think we're at 24 now, and the reason I say I think is because I don't stay up to that level of C++. Most of the C++ that I work with is C++ 11, maybe 17 as well. But anything beyond that, especially in the space industry, due to certification rules and whatnot, and qualification, you'll find that most companies are still writing code to C++ 11 or C++ 17. Some may really be pushing the limits to the newer versions of C++, but pick a version that you know best, stick with it. Don't try to learn the latest ones for the interview. Stick with what you know, but really know it. That would be my advice for you on that one. So really get to know it and go on YouTube. And if you don't understand what a copy constructor is, or what the new features were added in C++ 11 versus C99 or whatnot, or C++ 17, then definitely go and look up the release notes on that and really understand what the features were that were released and what makes them different from each other, because some of these new techniques or implementations of the language may have pros and cons to being implemented, and you really want to know what you're using makes most sense for the applications you are writing. So that is really going to set you aside from somebody who just writes C++. All right, let's continue on here. So live coding tests. I like these and dislike these. So I have done live coding tests at many companies, both software-only style companies, and I've done them at the current company I currently work for, where I had to do a a series of live coding problems, algorithm based for the most part, and really show my ability and understanding of the language and why I chose to write the implementation the way I did. And these are good to get a sense of the individual's abilities, although I do find nerves can typically get the best of someone. And if you're one of those people, then this is something that you might have to try and push beyond. And it helps just to really talk while you type. So if you are able to talk through the code while you're writing the code, it really helps the interviewer understand what you are thinking while you are going through that process. If you're sitting there just mouth quiet, not saying a thing, not making any eye contact, just writing code, they really have not much to go on. For all they know, you are completely stuck, and inside you're just like, what do I do? When is this going to be over? I'm just completely stuck. But that's not necessarily the case. You might be, trying to solve a problem in your head. Everybody goes about these problems differently. So definitely speak out loud. You cannot really say too much in this sense when you're writing through, and they'll definitely appreciate that a lot more and be able to understand. And even if you don't solve the problem, but they like the way that you are going at solving the problem, that might be enough to really get you to that next level in the interview process. And then the other one I mentioned there was whiteboarding. So I have not seen any whiteboarding exercises. I think the days of bringing individuals on site for an interview, at least at this stage in the interview process, doesn't really exist anymore. Typically, they know they're going to hire you at this point if they're bringing you on site. And that's typically beyond or past the point of any coding interview or anything like that. The only company I've ever interviewed with where I had to do a whiteboard session was Amazon, and that was for their Prime Video team in Santa Monica. They flew me out there, went through, did everything, and it was an interesting process. All the people there were super nice, nothing bad to say. I enjoyed the interview quite a bit, but I was hoping that they were going to be using a different stack than what they had, and in the end, it wasn't a good fit. So, and I'm not a huge fan of the Santa Monica area, a bit too busy for me. But it was a great experience, and again, helps me better prepare for, I guess, other interviews than that at the time being. But it worked out well because it wasn't the industry I wanted to be in. It was more so just going to be a stepping stone. But yeah, anyways, let's talk about the next part of the interview process, and that is behavioral, which I feel a lot of software engineers and computer scientists, or just engineers in general, usually forget about. So this is part of the interview where they want to know how you handle high pressure situations, especially space-based missions, which are mission critical and can result in failure. So if you're on a human flight mission or something like that, well, lives are at stake as well, and your code could be the code that keeps them alive. So understanding that and being able to handle stress is very key. So going through these behavioral analysis interviews and seeing how you solve problems under stress is definitely key. So the problem-solving mindset for these companies, they love candidates who can really talk through a challenge and explain their thought process clearly, like I was just mentioning. So this is for all aspects, not just the coding interviews and that, but talking through anything. You'll get asked problems like, hey, if you were in a situation where you, witnessed somebody writing code or being negligent in their code, or just maybe they're just clicking approve on a merge request and they didn't actually review that code, and what's the ethical thing do you do here? Do you confront that individual? Do you let it slide and just say, oh, I'm sure they know what they're doing, or what do you do in those cases, right? So there will be ethics questions and stuff like that, problem-solving questions outside of coding, more so team-based and that, and just understanding that that way that the individual handles these problems will help them better understand how they will be to work with. So you definitely want to brush up on some examples of those and see what kind of responses different companies are looking for. There's some pretty standard responses for a lot of these, and they'll want you to have some predetermined examples, I guess, from previous roles or whatnot. Maybe if you're coming straight out of university, it might be, how you worked in group projects, what was your role on that team, how did you deal with any types of conflicts, maybe somebody wasn't pulling their weight, did you address it, did you just let it slide, like how did you deal with these situations, and talking through those with your recruiter or the hiring manager is gonna help them better understand who you are as a person. So let's continue on to personal projects and contributions. So if you have a GitHub with space-related projects, or even not space-related projects, or simulations, or software for CubeSats, or anything that really sets you apart, I've seen a lot of individuals that seem to come to this industry really enjoy quadcopters or drones and whatnot, and a lot of them have control algorithms that they have written to control their drones or quadcopters or whatnot. So there's a lot of those opportunities. Definitely share those with the team. It really shows that you have a understanding of what you're working on. You enjoy doing it. It's not just a job for you, but a passion. And a lot of these space companies, that's key. Your passion for what you do, rather than, hey, I just need a job and I thought this was cool. A lot of the times if you say something like that, unless you are absolutely like the top 1% in your field and like absolutely a genius, and not to say nobody here's genius, but yeah, I don't know, you might get what I'm saying. But anyways, unless you're that top 1% and they can look past some of these other things, showing that you have a passion for what you do will definitely show that you want to be there. And these companies will more so look past if there's some skill sets you are missing and be like, hey, we can train this person. They look like they sound like somebody that we would love to work with. You know, they have a great personality. Yes, I said it, great personality. That might be what gets you the job, even if you are missing a few of the skills. And I'll actually just harp on that for a second as well. If you look at an application or a posted role and you're like, I only have 70% of what they're asking for, I'm going to go try and come back in a year or two when I have more of what it takes, I say apply. You might still get the job. There's no reason to think you won't. They don't expect everyone to have everything. So the different things that they add onto a resume, whether it's like, say you're a Java engineer or you program in Java or Python, you're not really big on C++, but you're not doing flight software. The role might not need that critical understanding of it, and they're like, well, maybe they can learn this as they go. Also, it obviously depends on the level of the role. If you're coming in as a new hire, level 1 or a junior, it's probably okay. You're going to learn a lot of this as you go. Now, if you're applying as a level 3, you're definitely going to want to have that background before you apply. So every situation is different, but do not let the fact that you might not have every check in the box for that role keep you from actually applying to that job, because maybe that job won't be there in another year. So it's good to get the experience. There's no harm in applying to a role and going through the interview and getting turned down. If anything, it gives you a greater experience and you know what to expect for the next one, sorry. So every little bit of experience counts. Now, I will say, do not apply to 1,000 roles at the same company. Most companies can see that, and you'll probably just get turned away because all the other teams will say, oh, they're not really interested in my team. So, never mind. I think the magic number is typically like 3 or 4 roles. If you're looking at a company, you find 3 to 4 roles you really like, apply to those, and then you're probably okay. But anything more than that, people start to get a little fishy with what you're doing and think that you're just mass applying to everywhere and you're not really interested in what they do. You just want a job. So again, that passion for what you do and the role you're looking at is going to be what sets you apart. And definitely do your background on the role and the company itself. I hate when people apply to a role and I'm like, so why do you want this job? And they'll go through and be like, space is cool. I want to be a part of a company that does this. And it's like, okay, now why this team? Why did you apply to this role specifically? And they're like, because it intrigued me. Okay, cool. What intrigued you? Like, what do you know about what we do? And if they can't answer that question, more often than not, it's a no. And that's not just for me, that's many people. They really want to know you care about what you're doing and it wasn't just, a click, apply, and let's see what happens. So some companies might not care, but in my experience and myself individually as hiring people for space industry roles, I definitely want them to have done their research and actually show that they're going to care, because that's really going to reflect on how they apply themselves to the role and the work they do as well. If they don't really care from the get-go, chances are you're not going to have a high-performing individual on the team. So with that, final thoughts here. If you're just starting out, again, don't worry. There are many ways to gain experience and break into this industry. It is a difficult industry to get into, especially if you are not currently in the space industry. So don't let that discourage you. Apply. Do the interviews, learn what you can, figure out what you need to improve on, and come back. Internships are huge. Many space companies offer them, and they're often the best way to get your foot in the door and kind of build those relationships beforehand. And once you have those relationships, then you can reach out to those individuals, or when a role opens up, then away you go. Next thing is open source contributions and online courses and certifications. Obviously, you're going to need a 4-year degree or a master's is typically preferred. If you don't have that yet, that's fine. Definitely work towards it. Undergrad at a minimum, though. And if you just have the undergrad, showing that you have some contributions to the industry through open source things on like GitHub, and that definitely helps as well, and helps you gain that practical experience. The next part is networking. It's one of those industries where it's not who you know, it's not what you know, it's who you know. Well, it's what you know and it's who you know. You need both in this one. So if you don't know people, but you have the skill set, you can typically find a way to get yourself in there. But if you have the skill set and you know the people in the company, a referral goes a long way. So definitely any space industry conferences, online communities, or even professionals on LinkedIn, try and connect with them. Send them a message, say, hey, I'm interested in this area. Can you help me learn more about the field? Can you, send me a little branch to grab onto and see if you can help me out here? And, you never know where that's going to lead. So it's definitely worth trying. So landing a software job at a space company is definitely challenging, but it is absolutely possible with the right skills and preparation. So definitely keep pushing forward, build your expertise, work on those projects, do what you have to do to get aligned with the industry needs, and go from there. Really, again, you don't have to meet every check in the box. So get that application in and see what happens. So that's a wrap for today's episode. I really hope that this gave some insight of what it takes to break into these roles in space companies and the space industry just as a whole. If you have any questions or want to hear more about any specific areas or aspects of, say, an interview process, or more, key points around the skill sets, or kind of where to look for building out different skills and whatnot, or what schools to look at for different programs and whatnot, definitely feel free to reach out to me on social media, drop a comment down below and whatnot, and I will definitely be happy to kind of help walk you through that. So that is all I have for everyone. So with that, I hope you all enjoyed today's episode. Again, definitely follow along on here, subscribe, and like this episode. Leave me a comment below. Let me know what you think. And until next time, stay curious, keep looking up. Take care, everyone, and have a great weekend. Happy Friday.